The signature at the bottom of the document made my blood run cold. I knew that elegant cursive anywhere. I'd seen it on birthday cards and notes stuck to my refrigerator for years. Mara, my own sister, had forged my signature on documents that made it look like I'd been stealing from the company for months. My name is Audrey, and until today I was a senior financial analyst at Morton & Pierce Investment Group. Now I'm sitting in my car in the parking lot, a cardboard box of personal items in my back seat, trying to make sense of how my life imploded in less than 24 hours. "We have substantial evidence of fund misappropriation," Mr. Pierce had said this morning, sliding the documents across his desk. "I'm disappointed, Audrey. We trusted you." "This isn't my signature," I'd protested, my hands shaking as I flipped through page after page of falsified records. "I would never—" The forensic accountant confirmed everything. He'd cut me off with a wave of his hand. "Security will escort you out. We'll be pressing charges." My phone buzzes now. Another message from Mom. "Mara told us everything. How could you do this to the family name, to your sister's reputation at the firm?" I switch off my phone and lean my forehead against the steering wheel. Of course, Mara got to them first. She's always been one step ahead, the golden child who could do no wrong. Even now, as she orchestrates my downfall, they believe her version without question. "Audrey?" A tap on my window makes me jump. It's Dean from IT, looking concerned. "Are you okay?" "I heard what happened." I roll down the window, wiping my eyes. "Did you hear their version or the truth?" "I'm not sure I know either yet," he says carefully. "But something doesn't add up. Mara's been acting strange lately, especially around Theo from accounting." "Theo?" I sit up straighter. "What do you mean?" "They've been having a lot of closed-door meetings. Last week I overheard them arguing about some kind of timeline." Dean glances over his shoulder. "Look, I should get back inside, but—" He hesitates, then scribbles something on a sticky note. "This is my personal number. If you need anything, call me." As he walks away, I unfold the note. Below his number, he's written, "Check the server access logs from last month. Mara's login. After hours." My hands are steadier now as I start the car. I drive to the coffee shop where Mara and I used to meet every Sunday, before she got her promotion, before things changed. I know she'll be here. It's where she holds her afternoon meetings now. Sure enough, I spot her through the window sitting with Theo. Their heads are close together, voices low. I park across the street and watch as Theo slides a USB drive across the table. "Everything's there," I read his lips saying. "No one will trace it back to us." Mara's smile is triumphant as she tucks the drive into her purse. The same smile she wore at dinner last week when she announced her upcoming promotion to partner, a position I'd been in line for. My phone buzzes again. This time it's Dad. "We need to talk about this, sweetheart. Come home." I start typing a response, then delete it. They won't believe me. Not yet. Not without proof. But I've got something now. Dean's tip about the server logs, the USB drive, and, most importantly, I know Theo is involved. Mara exits the coffee shop, her designer heels clicking on the sidewalk. She passes right by my car without noticing me, still wearing that self-satisfied smile. 5 years of sisterhood destroyed for a promotion and a corner office. I pull out Dean's note and add it to a fresh document on my phone titled Evidence. Below it I write, "Coffee shop meeting, USB drive, Theo involved." It's not much, but it's a start. My apartment keycard doesn't work when I get home. They've already locked me out. The security guard watches sympathetically as I fill a suitcase with essentials. "Corporate says you have an hour to clear out," he tells me. As I pack, I find a photo of Mara and me from last Christmas, arms around each other, smiling. I turn it face down in the drawer. The sister in that photo is gone, replaced by someone who could forge my signature, steal my career, and turn my family against me without hesitation. "Game on, sis," I whisper, closing my suitcase. "You taught me well. Never leave a paper trail. But you forgot one thing. I know all your secrets too. And I've got nothing left to lose. 6 months into my new life in Boston. and I barely recognize myself in the mirror. Gone is the polished financial analyst with designer suits and perfectly styled hair. The woman staring back at me has sharper eyes and a determined set to her jaw. I've learned that revenge requires patience and a complete reinvention. My phone lights up with a text from Dean. Mara's been promoted to managing director. Theo's right behind her. Thought you should know. I'm typing a response when my new boss calls me into her office. Audrey, I need your eyes on something. Sandra waves me over to her desk at the boutique consulting firm where I now work under an old college friend's recommendation. These numbers don't add up. I scan the spreadsheet, spotting the discrepancy immediately. It's the kind of financial sleight of hand I've become expert at recognizing. Someone's trying to hide unauthorized transfers, I explain, highlighting the relevant cells. See how they've buried it in the quarterly reports? Sandra's eyes narrow. Just like you said happened at Morton and Pierce. Similar technique, I agree carefully. We both know my history, or the version I chose to share. Want me to dig deeper? Please do. She pauses, studying me. You know, for someone who supposedly embezzled millions, you're remarkably good at catching others doing it. I meet her gaze steadily. Funny how that works, isn't it? Back at my desk, I open my private email to find a message from an anonymous account. Interested in the truth about Mara G, meet me at Café Luna, 7 p.m. tonight. I trace the IP address. It's from Morton and Pierce's network. My heart races, but I've learned not to trust easily. I text Dean. Know anyone still in IT who can check outgoing emails today? His response comes quickly. Lexi from accounting sent it. She's Mara's new protégé, but word is they're not getting along. At 7 p.m. sharp, I spot Lexi sitting alone in the cafe's corner, nervously shredding a napkin. She's younger than I expected, probably fresh out of college. I know what they did to you, she blurts out as I sit down. I found the original documents, before they were altered. Mara makes me process similar transactions now, but they're getting sloppy. Why tell me this? Because she's going to do the same thing to me. Lexi's voice shakes. I know too much, and she's already setting me up as a fall guy, just like she did to you. I lean back, studying her. Prove it. She slides her phone across the table. On it are photos of documents, transfer records, emails between Mara and Theo, server logs. My hands itch to grab it, but I force myself to remain calm. Why not take this to the police? They've got friends in the DA's office now. Lexi pulls the phone back. Besides, half of these documents I shouldn't have access to. I'd be arrested before Mara. A waiter approaches and we both fall silent. When he leaves, Lexi leans forward. I can help you. I can get you more proof. At what cost? Protection. When it all comes out, I want immunity. And a recommendation for a new job. Somewhere far from Mara's reach. I consider her offer. Send copies of everything to this email, I say, writing down my secure address. But if you're playing me, remember, I've got nothing left to lose. Later that night, my laptop pings with an incoming email. Dozens of files, each one a piece of the puzzle I've been trying to solve. As I scroll through them, my phone rings. It's Mom. Audrey, please come home for Dad's birthday next month. The family misses you. Does Mara miss me too? I ask coldly. Mom sighs. She's worried about you, living alone in Boston. She says you've been sending her threatening emails. I sit up straight. What emails? Something about exposing the truth. Sweetheart, you need to let this go. Mara's trying to protect the family name by not pressing charges. My laugh is bitter. Of course she is. I end the call and immediately text Dean. Mara's creating a paper trail, making me look unstable. Be careful, he responds. She's got the board wrapped around her finger now. Whatever you're planning, make it bulletproof. I open my evidence folder, adding Lexi's files to my growing collection. 6 months of careful research, witness statements, and financial records. But Mara's latest move means I need to accelerate my timeline. Game's changing, sis, I mutter, creating a new folder labelled Phase 2. Time to remind you why you should have feared the quiet one. Ms. Blake will see you now. the receptionist announces, gesturing toward the corner office of the Boston Herald's investigative department. I straighten my blazer and grab my briefcase, containing months of carefully organized evidence. Vivian Blake isn't what I expected. Instead of the hardened investigative journalist I'd imagined, she's relaxed in yoga pants and a designer sweater, feet propped on her desk. "So," she says, not looking up from my file, "you're the whistleblower Dean told me about? The sister story." I prefer to think of it as corporate fraud with a family twist. That gets her attention. She swings her feet down and leans forward. "Show me what you've got." I spread the documents across her desk. Server logs, transaction records, Lexi's photos, even screenshots of the fake threatening emails Mara's been sending herself from spoofed accounts. "Impressive," Vivian murmurs, examining a particularly damning email chain between Mara and Theo. "But why come to me? Why not the SEC? Because Mara's too smart for that. She's got friends in regulatory bodies now. I need someone who can't be bought." "And you think that's me?" "I think you've built a career exposing corporate corruption. And I think you understand what it's like to be underestimated." Vivian's lips twitch. "Dean said you were good." She taps the files. "This is solid groundwork, but we need more. Direct testimony, insider confirmation." "I've got Lexi ready to talk." "The protégé?" Vivian shakes her head. "Not enough. We need someone higher up, someone with real authority." My phone buzzes, a text from Dean. Theo's asking questions about old server access, getting nervous. "What about Theo?" I suggest. "He's Mara's right hand, but he's also the weak link. If we apply pressure..." "Now you're thinking like a journalist." Vivian grabs her phone. "I know someone in the SEC who owes me a favor. Let's see how Theo handles a surprise audit." As we strategize, my phone rings. It's Sandra from work. "Audrey, remember those suspicious transfers you flagged? They lead back to Morton and Pierce. The board wants to meet with you tomorrow." After leaving Vivian's office, I find Dean waiting in the lobby. He's grown his beard out since I left Morton and Pierce, but his kind eyes haven't changed. "Thought you might need coffee after that," he says, holding out a cup. "How'd it go?" "Vivian's on board, but we need more ammunition." I take a sip, savouring the familiar comfort of our coffee ritual. "How well do you know Theo?" "Well enough to know he's been drinking at O'Malley's every night this week, alone." I raise an eyebrow. "Really?" "Don't do anything stupid, Audrey." Dean touches my arm. "Mara's dangerous when cornered." "So am I." I check my watch. "I should go. I have that board meeting tomorrow." "Let me drive you home, at least." In the car, Dean's quiet for a while before speaking. "You know, when this all started, I thought you were just angry. But it's more than that, isn't it? It's about justice," I say, watching the city lights blur past, and making sure she can't do this to anyone else. He pulls up to my building but doesn't unlock the doors. "Just be careful, okay? Some people are worth losing everything for. I'm not sure Mara's one of them." I turn to face him, suddenly aware of how close we are. "I'm not losing everything. I'm gaining something too." His hand finds mine in the darkness. "Yeah? What's that?" "Myself." I squeeze his hand, then let go. "And maybe something else too." Later that night, my laptop pings with an email from Vivian. "Theo took the bait. SEC audit scheduled for next week. He's panicking." I'm drafting a response when someone knocks on my door. Through the peephole, I see Lexi looking terrified. "Mara knows," she gasps as I let her in. "Someone told her I copied the files. She's cleaning house, deleting everything." "It's okay," I assure her, though my mind is racing. "We have backups." "You don't understand." Lexi pulls out her phone, showing me an email. "She's calling an emergency board meeting tomorrow, the same one you're invited to." She's trying to get ahead of the story, I realise. Frame it her way before we can expose her. What are we going to do? I grab my phone, texting Dean and Vivian. "Emergency meeting tomorrow. Mara's making her move. Time for plan B." Then I turn to Lexi. "How good are you at public speaking?" Her eyes widen. "Why?" "Because tomorrow we're going to give them a show they'll never forget." I pull out my laptop. "And you're going to help me write the script." Dad's birthday party feels like walking into a minefield. The moment I step into my childhood home, conversations drop to whispers. Mom's perfectly manicured smile doesn't reach her eyes as she hugs me. Audrey! We didn't think you'd come! She grips my shoulders, examining me like I'm a stranger. You look different. Boston agrees with me, I say, scanning the room. Where's Mara? Oh, running late as usual. Such a busy executive, you know how it is. I do know. I've memorized Mara's schedule better than she has. Dad emerges from his study and his face lights up. There's my girl. His hug is genuine, warming something inside me I thought had frozen. Come see what your sister sent, quite the extravagant gift. On his desk sits a gleaming Rolex, the exact model I'd mentioned buying him last year, before everything fell apart. Beautiful, I manage. Must be doing well at Morton and Pierce. Speaking of which, Mom interjects, she's being featured in Financial Weekly, rising star under 40E or something like that. The doorbell rings and suddenly she's there. Mara sweeps in like a hurricane in designer clothes, air kissing everyone's cheeks. Audrey! She freezes for a split second before recovering. What a surprise. How's the new job? Enlightening, I reply, watching her face. We should catch up. I'd love to hear about that SEC audit coming up. Her smile tightens imperceptibly. Before she can respond, Theo appears behind her, looking worse than when I last saw him. Dark circles under his eyes, slightly rumpled suit. Theo, darling, you remember my sister? Mara's voice is honey-sweet poison. How could I forget? His handshake is clammy. Still in Boston? Still drinking at O'Malley's? I counter quietly. He drops my hand like it burns. Dad calls everyone to dinner, and I find myself seated between Mom and Theo, directly across from Mara. The perfect staging for what comes next. Pass the wine, Theo? I ask innocently. As he reaches for the bottle, his sleeve rides up, revealing fresh ink on his wrist. Nice tattoo. When did you get that? Last week, he mumbles. Funny. I take a sip of wine. Isn't that right when the SEC announced their surprise audit? Mara's fork clatters against her plate. Audrey, dear, how's your love life? Still single? Actually, I've been seeing someone. He works in IT security. Fascinating field, all about digital footprints and server logs. Mom jumps in, desperate to change the subject. Did everyone see the lovely article about Mara? Not yet, I smile. But I heard Vivian Blake is working on quite an interesting piece about Morton and Pierce. Theo chokes on his wine. Mara's face goes pale. Who's Vivian Blake? Dad asks. Oh, just the most respected investigative journalist in Boston, I explain. She has a nose for corporate fraud. Speaking of which, Theo, how's Lexi doing? She quit, Mara cuts in sharply. Personal reasons. Really? I had coffee with her yesterday. She seemed fine to me. The tension at the table is thick enough to cut. Mum's hands shake as she serves dessert. Audrey, Mara's voice is steel wrapped in silk. Can we talk privately? In Dad's study, she drops the act. Whatever you think you're doing, stop. Now. Or what? You'll forge more documents. Send yourself more threatening emails. I'm trying to protect this family's reputation. Everything I did for us. No, I step closer. You did it for yourself. And now you're scared because Theo's cracking, Lexi's talking, and your perfect house of cards is about to collapse. You have no proof. I pull out my phone, playing a recording. Theo's voice slurred but clear, confessing everything at O'Malley's last night. That's just the beginning, I whisper. I learned from the best, sis. Never leave a paper trail unless it's someone else's. A knock at the door makes us both jump. It's Dad. Everything okay in here? His eyes move between us, concerned. Perfect, Mara says brightly. Just catching up. As we return to the party, my phone buzzes with a text from Dean. Vivian's story runs tomorrow. Theo just called her office wanting to talk. I watch Mara charm the room, laughing at Dad's jokes, refilling Mom's wine. She thinks she's won, that she's still in control, but I see the cracks in her facade, the way her hands tremble slightly as she raises her glass. Happy birthday, Dad, I say, hugging him goodbye. Sorry, but I have an early meeting tomorrow. With who? Mara asks sharply. I pause at the door, savouring the moment. The Boston Herald, they're doing a fascinating story on family dynamics in corporate America. You should read it. The look on her face as I leave is worth every second of waiting. Vivian's office is chaos when I arrive the next morning. Phones ringing off the hook, reporters huddled around monitors, and in the centre of it all, Theo sitting with his head in his hands. Your sister's been calling every 10 minutes, Vivian says, waving me over. The story's gone viral. Morton and Pierce's stock dropped 12% in the first hour of trading. I want immunity, Theo blurts out as I approach. I'll tell you everything, but I want a deal. That's not my decision, I reply, sitting across from him. But Vivian has friends at the SEC who might be interested in what you have to say. His confession spills out like a burst dam. The original scheme, how Mara convinced him to help frame me, the years of cooking books and falsifying records. Vivian's recorder catches every word. She said it was just once, he says, voice cracking. Just to get rid of you because you were asking too many questions. But then it became a pattern. My phone buzzes, Dean's calling. You need to see this, he says when I answer. Mara's doing damage control. Turn on CNBC. Vivian flips on the office TV. There's my sister perfectly composed in a power suit, addressing reporters outside Morton and Pierce. These allegations are completely unfounded, she's saying. My sister has a history of mental health issues and a vendetta against this company. We have documentation proving... You mean these documents? Lexi's voice cuts through the crowd. The camera swings to show her holding up a thick folder. The ones you made me forge last week? The press erupts. Mara's perfect mask slips for just a second before she recovers, but it's too late. The cameras caught it all. Send everything to the SEC, I tell Theo. Every email, every document, every conversation you remember. It's your only chance. He nods numbly, then looks up at me. I'm sorry, Audrey. I really am. Save it for the prosecutors. Back at my apartment, Dean's waiting with coffee and takeout. You okay? He asks as I collapse onto the couch. I should be celebrating, I say, staring at the ceiling. Why doesn't it feel like a victory? He sits beside me, close enough that our shoulders touch. Because it's not over yet, and because it's family. My phone lights up with a text from Mom. Please tell me this isn't true. What have you done? Before I can respond, another message appears, from Dad. I found the original documents in Mara's old room. We need to talk. I should go see him, I say, but Dean catches my hand. Not tonight. Tonight you rest. Tomorrow's going to be intense. He's right. By morning, the story has exploded. Vivian's article is everywhere, complete with Theo's confession and Lexi's documents. Morton and Pierce announces an emergency board meeting. The SEC launches a formal investigation. We've got her, Vivian says when I reach her office, but she's not going down without a fight. She's right. Within hours, Mara's legal team releases a statement claiming all evidence was fabricated, along with medical records suggesting I have a history of paranoid delusions. Those are fake, I say immediately, but Vivian's already ahead of me. Already confirmed with your actual doctors. She's desperate, making mistakes. My phone rings. It's Mara. After a year of silence, seeing her name on my screen feels surreal. What do you want? I answer. A truce, she says, her voice tight. Name your price. Whatever they're paying you for this hit piece, I'll double it. This isn't about money, Mara. It never was. Then what? Revenge? Congratulations, you've ruined me. Happy now? No, I say quietly. I'm not happy. I'm sad that my sister turned out to be exactly who I feared she was. There's a long pause. The board meeting's tomorrow, she finally says. Last chance to back down. See you there, sis. After I hang up, Dean pulls me into a hug. Whatever happens tomorrow, you're not alone anymore. I lean into him, allowing myself this moment of weakness. I know. My phone buzzes one last time, a message from Lexi. Mara just called an emergency meeting with her legal team. She's planning something big for tomorrow. Let her plan, I text back. We've got something bigger. I open my laptop, pulling up the final piece of evidence I've been saving. The original security footage from the day Mara forged my signature, captured by a camera she didn't know existed. "Ready for tomorrow?" Dean asks, watching me work. I think of Mum's disappointment, Dad's confusion, the family dinners that will never be the same. Then I think of all the other potential victims I'm saving from my sister's schemes. "Ready," I say, hitting send on an email to Vivian. Time to end this. The Morton and Pierce lobby feels smaller than I remember. Security guards eye me warily as Dean and I walk through the metal detectors. My old badge, reactivated for today's board meeting, feels heavy around my neck. "Ms. Gomez," a familiar voice calls. Mr. Pierce himself stands by the elevators, looking older than I remember. "I hope you understand the gravity of today's meeting." "I do," I reply. "Do you?" The elevator ride to the 40th floor is tense. Dean's hand finds mine, squeezing gently. When the doors open, we're greeted by a circus, reporters held back by security, board members huddled in groups, and Vivian Blake holding court near the conference room. "They're all here," she murmurs as we pass. "SEC investigators, major shareholders, even your parents." My steps falter. My parents? Mara invited them, trying to make this personal instead of professional. Inside the boardroom, Mara sits at the head of the table, flanked by lawyers. She looks immaculate as always, but there's a wildness in her eyes I've never seen before. "Welcome, everyone," she begins as the room fills. "We're here to address some unfortunate allegations." "Save it," Mr. Pierce interrupts. "The SEC has questions about certain financial discrepancies." "Which I can explain," Mara says smoothly. "But first, I'd like to address the source of these malicious claims. My sister Audrey has a documented history of—" "Actually," I cut in, standing up. "Let's talk about documentation. Specifically, this security footage from last year." I nod to Dean, who connects his laptop to the projector. The video plays, crystal clear. Mara at my desk after hours, practicing my signature before forging it on company documents. The room erupts. Mara's lawyers huddle around her, whispering frantically. I see Mom cover her mouth in shock, Dad's face hardening with disappointment. "That footage is inadmissible," one lawyer shouts. "It was obtained illegally." "Wrong," Dean speaks up. "As head of IT security, I maintained all surveillance systems legally. This footage has been authenticated by 3 independent experts." Mara stands, her chair scraping loudly. "This proves nothing except that I signed some documents. As senior partner, I had authority." "To forge signatures? To frame your sister for embezzlement?" Vivian steps forward, dropping a thick file on the table. "We have Theo's full confession, Lexi's testimony, and every document you falsified over the past 3 years." "Theo?" Mara laughs, but it sounds hollow. "A drunk who's angry about being passed over for promotion? And Lexi, my disgruntled ex-assistant?" The boardroom doors burst open. Theo walks in, followed by 2 SEC investigators. He looks sober, pressed, and terrified. "Tell them what you told us," one investigator says. Theo can't meet Mara's eyes. "It started with Audrey. Mara said we needed to remove her because she'd discovered irregularities in our international accounts. After that, it became a pattern. Every quarter, more adjustments, more cover-ups." "You're lying," Mara's composure cracks. "You helped me. You were part of everything." "Yes," Theo says quietly. "That's why I kept records. Insurance, I called it. Every email, every conversation, every transaction." Mr. Pierce stands slowly. "Mara, is this true?" She looks around the room wildly like a cornered animal. Her eyes land on our parents. "Mom, Dad, you know me. I did what I had to do, for the family, for our reputation." "Stop." Dad's voice is heavy with grief. "Just stop, Mara." The SEC investigators move forward. "Ms. Gomez, we need you to come with us." What happens next seems to move in slow motion. Mara lunges for her laptop, probably trying to delete evidence, but Lexi's faster. She grabs it first, backing away as Mara reaches for her. "It's over," I say softly. "Let it go." For a moment our eyes meet. I see the sister I used to know, the one who taught me to ride a bike and helped me with math homework. Then she straightens, smooths her jacket, and turns to the investigators. I want my lawyer present for any questions. As they lead her out, Mum starts crying. Dad puts his arm around her, then looks at me. We should have listened to you. I'm so sorry, sweetheart. The boardroom slowly empties. Dean takes my hand again, and this time I don't let go. You okay? He asks. No, I answer honestly. But I will be. My phone buzzes, a text from Vivian. Stories going live in an hour. Want to comment? I look around the room where everything ended and began. Not today, I text back. Today's for family. Let's get out of here, Dean suggests. Get some coffee? I smile, feeling lighter than I have in years. Coffee sounds perfect. The courthouse steps are swarming with reporters as I make my way inside. 3 months after the board meeting, it's finally time for Mara's arraignment. The headlines scream corporate scandal of the decade and sister versus sister, the Morton and Pierce conspiracy. Ready for this? Dean asks, adjusting his tie. He's taken the day off to be here, just like he's been there every step of the way. Before I can answer, Vivian appears, notepad in hand. They're offering her a deal. 5 years if she pleads guilty and returns the money. She won't take it, I say. She'll fight. Inside, the courtroom is packed. I spot Theo sitting with his lawyer, looking haunted. Lexi's there too, surrounded by SEC investigators. Mum and Dad sit in the front row, leaving space between them. The bailiff calls for order as Mara enters in handcuffs. Her designer suit can't hide how pale she's become, how the past 3 months in custody have worn her down. For a moment our eyes meet, and I see something I've never seen before in my sister's face. Fear. How does the defendant plead? The judge asks. Mara's lawyer stands. Your Honour, before entering a plea, we'd like to present new evidence suggesting my client was herself a victim of corporate espionage. Objection. The prosecutor jumps up. This is an arraignment, not a trial. Sustained. The judge looks irritated. Ms. Gomez, your plea? Mara stands slowly. Not guilty. A murmur ripples through the courtroom. Dad shakes his head. Mum starts crying again. During the recess, Theo approaches me in the hallway. She's going to try to pin everything on me, he says, voice shaking. Her lawyers found inconsistencies in my testimony. Because you were drunk when you gave it, I ask. He nods miserably. I've been sober 60 days now, but they'll use it against me. Say I was unreliable, confused. We have the footage, I remind him, and Lexi's documents. Mara claims Lexi forged those too, says she was trying to take her job. Before I can respond, shouting erupts near the courtroom doors. Mara's being led back in when she suddenly breaks away from her guards, rushing toward us. You ruined everything, she screams at me. I built this life from nothing, and you destroyed it because you were jealous. Security guards grab her arms, but she keeps struggling. Tell them the truth, Theo. Tell them who really orchestrated the whole thing. That's enough, the judge's voice booms through the hallway. Get the defendant under control, or she'll be remanded without bail. As they drag Mara away, I notice something odd. She's smiling. It's the same smile she wore the day she got me fired. She's planning something, I tell Dean later at the coffee shop. I know that look. He sets down his cup. The prosecutor called. They found a laptop in Mara's apartment with encrypted files. They're trying to crack it now. My phone rings. It's Lexi, sounding panicked. Mara's lawyer just submitted new evidence. Emails between you and me, planning to frame her, but they're fake. I never sent them. She's been preparing for this, I realise. All those months before we exposed her, she was creating a backup plan. There's more, Lexi continues. They're claiming the security footage was doctored. They have an expert witness ready to testify. I hang up and turn to Dean. Can you prove the footage is authentic? Already working on it. But Audrey... He hesitates. There's something else. Someone broke into the IT department last night. The original server logs are missing. My coffee goes cold as we piece it together. Mara's not just fighting the charges, she's trying to flip the entire narrative. Make it look like I orchestrated an elaborate scheme to frame her out of jealousy. We need to talk to Vivian, I say, standing up. If Mara wants to play this game, we'll beat her at it one last time. But when we reach Vivian's office, She's waiting with news of her own. The SEC just called, she says grimly. They found something in Mara's financial records that changes everything, something that leads back 15 years. To our father's company. My world tilts sideways. What are you saying? I'm saying this goes deeper than we thought. Mara wasn't working alone, and tomorrow in court, she's going to reveal who really taught her how to commit fraud. I sink into a chair, remembering Dad's face when he found those documents in Mara's room, the way he's been avoiding my calls lately. Well, I say finally, looks like tomorrow's going to be interesting. Dean squeezes my shoulder. Whatever happens, we face it together. I nod, watching the sun set over Boston's skyline. The truth about our family is about to get much uglier, but for the first time, I'm not afraid of it. The courtroom falls silent as Dad takes the stand. His hands shake as he's sworn in, but his voice is steady when he speaks. Yes, I taught Mara everything she knows about creative accounting. It started at my own company, small adjustments to keep us afloat during the recession. I never meant for it to go this far. Mara sits perfectly still, watching him testify. Mum's already left the courtroom, unable to bear it. And Audrey? The prosecutor asks. Did she know about any of this? No, Dad sighs heavily. She was always too honest. That's why Mara saw her as a threat at Morton and Pierce. She knew Audrey would eventually figure it out. I feel Dean's hand slip into mine as Dad continues describing years of financial manipulation, of teaching Mara to hide money through shell companies and false documentation. The same techniques she used to frame me. During the recess, Mara's lawyer approaches with a final plea deal. Your sister's willing to testify against your father in exchange for a reduced sentence. Of course she is, I say, watching Mara whisper with her legal team. She's still trying to win. Back in session, Mara takes the stand. She's ditched her power suits for a simple blouse, playing the role of Daddy's corrupted little girl. I was just following what I was taught, she says, tears glistening. When Audrey started investigating the accounts, I panicked. I'd watched Dad handle whistleblowers before, so I did what he would have done. That's a lie. Dad stands up, but the bailiff orders him back to his seat. Vivian leans forward, whispering in my ear. She's throwing him under the bus to save herself. Classic Mara. But something's different this time. As Mara weaves her story of being manipulated by our father, I see the mask slipping. Her hands keep fidgeting with her watch, her tell when she's lying. During cross-examination, the prosecutor pulls out a surprise. We've recovered data from your encrypted laptop, Ms. Gomez. Would you like to explain these emails from 8 years ago before you even worked at Morton and Pierce? Mara's face goes white as the emails appear on the courtroom screen. Messages to offshore accounts, plans for embezzlement schemes, all predating her time with Dad's company. You weren't following anyone's playbook, the prosecutor continues. You were teaching your father your methods, weren't you? The courtroom erupts. Mara's lawyer demands a recess, but it's too late. The truth is finally out, written in Mara's own words. Dad stares at her, realization dawning. You said you learned it all from me. Because you wanted to believe it, Mara snaps, her facade cracking completely. Poor, weak Dad, so eager to think he was the master manipulator. You were just another mark. The judge calls for order as Mara's taken back into custody. Her lawyer immediately starts talking plea deals, but the prosecutor looks to me first. It's your call, Ms. Gomez. You're the primary victim here. I look at Mara. Really look at her. Behind the designer clothes and practiced smile, I see something broken that was probably always there. Offer her the original deal, I say. 5 years. But she has to make full restitution to everyone she hurt. Later, outside the courthouse, Dad catches up to me. I'm so sorry, sweetheart, I should have seen it sooner. We all should have, I reply. But we saw what we wanted to see. Your mother and I, we're selling the house, paying back everything I took, starting fresh. Good. I hug him, smelling the familiar aftershave. That's what second chances are for. Dean's waiting by his car, talking with Vivian about her upcoming book deal. Theo and Lexi stand nearby, both looking relieved it's over. "Ready to go home?" Dean asks as I approach. "Actually," I pull out my resignation letter from the consulting firm. "I have a better idea." He reads it, eyebrows raising. "You're starting your own company." "A financial oversight consultancy," I explain, "helping companies identify and prevent fraud. Vivian's already agreed to be on the board." "Using everything Mara taught you against people like her," he grins. "Perfect karma." "Want to help?" I ask. "I need a good IT security expert." His answer is a kiss that makes Vivian wolf whistle and Theo awkwardly look away. That evening, I visit Mara one last time before she's transferred to federal prison. She sits across from me in her orange jumpsuit, still somehow looking like she's wearing Prada. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she says. "I don't forgive you," I reply. "But I understand you now, and that's worth something." She nods slowly. "You won, little sister. Fair and square." "No, Mara. I just stopped letting you win." Walking out of the prison, I delete her number from my phone. Some family ties need to be cut to heal properly. But as Dean drives us home through the Boston night, I feel lighter. The truth cost us our old family, but it gave me something better. A life built on honesty, surrounded by people who earned their place in my story.
One day, my husband Charles unexpectedly revealed that he knew about the $6 million inheritance I received after my father passed away. I had kept this secret from him because I was contemplating a divorce due to his controlling nature, and I feared his greedy tendencies. His knowledge shocked me. I had barely uttered a word when he grinned and suggested using the money to remodel our family home. Upon confronting him, he admitted to coercing my mother into revealing the secret. His boldness left me seething with anger, and despite my protests, he dismissively remarked that my objections meant nothing and the decision was already made. I am Patricia, a 31-year-old who works at a prominent bank. My hectic job schedule left little room for a personal life, prompting me to join a matchmaking agency. That's where I met Charles, a jovial livery driver a year my senior. My profession rarely allowed me to meet women, and Charles felt fortunate to connect with someone like me. We shared immediate chemistry, and soon he proposed with the intention of marriage in mind. Our romance blossomed, and we married 4 years ago. Initially, our marriage was filled with love and mutual admiration. Charles often complimented my work ethic and success, which was more substantial than his own. However, as time passed, his demeanor shifted towards sarcasm and envy concerning my income. Similarly, my initially supportive in-laws began to change, their warmth turning into a chilly distance. They once praised how well I meshed with their son and expressed excitement about our future together. Yet, familial tensions, especially with in-laws, began to surface, altering the dynamic I once valued and leaving me to reconsider my relationship and the true intentions of those around me. As time passed, the true intentions of my in-laws became painfully clear. "Patricia, since you earn a good salary, why don't you buy us some things once in a while? I want a designer bag," my mother-in-law pressed, almost as if it were an obligation. Despite having recently gifted her a dress for her birthday, I stood firm on my policy of not lending or borrowing money, even to family. This stance infuriated them. "How dare you? We only accepted this marriage because you have a prestigious job at the bank. Frankly, we can't stand you. You're too outspoken," my mother-in-law erupted in anger. "What use is a daughter-in-law who doesn't financially support us? We expect birthday gifts. We're asking for cash, and yet you still refuse," my father-in-law chimed in, scolding me further while Charles merely nodded, offering no support. Adding insult to injury, Charles frequently made extravagant purchases like costly takeout and expensive furniture without discussing it with me. "You have a good income. This should be okay," he'd justify, ignoring the fact that his earnings were insufficient to cover these expenses, leaving me to manage the finances alone. Faced with constant mistreatment and a lack of support from Charles and his family, divorce seemed like the only viable option. Thankfully, we didn't have children, which simplified the decision somewhat. When I attempted to broach the topic of divorce, Charles evaded the conversation. "Divorce? I'm too tired to talk about that today. I'm heading to bed," he'd dismiss, avoiding a serious discussion at all costs. During this tumultuous time, I received a distressing call from my mother. "Hi, Mom, what's going on?" I asked, concerned. "Listen carefully, it's about your dad," she replied, her voice tense. She explained that a recent checkup had shown my father was seriously ill and needed immediate hospitalization. Understanding the urgency, I quickly prepared to leave for the hospital. As I was about to head out, Charles inquired where I was going. I explained the situation to my dad, highlighting yet another moment where I had to manage serious issues largely on my own. Charles's casual response to my urgent situation was disheartening, especially given that it concerned his father-in-law. I brushed off his indifference and hurried to the hospital to be with my mother. At the hospital, we learned from the doctor that my father had cancer with limited time left. The news was a heavy blow. My mother and I deliberated whether to tell him the full extent of his illness, but knowing he would prefer the truth, we chose honesty. Returning home heartbroken, I was met with Charles's insensitive inquiry, "Back from your dad's hospital, huh? How bad is it?" Despite my deep upset, I told him about my father's dire prognosis. His response was cruel and self-serving. "Oh, weren't you talking about divorce? If you want to stress your already ailing father with our problems, I'm ready whenever you are." His callousness sank my feelings for him even further, yet I hesitated to bring more stress upon my father. Charles's attitude grew worse, seeming almost satisfied by my increased workload and reluctance to discuss divorce. He then, shockingly, asked about my father's inheritance. "So what about your dad's inheritance? How much are we talking about? I'm his son-in-law, so I should get a share, right?" His audacity to mention such things while my father was still fighting for his life was appalling. "That's ridiculous. My dad is still alive. How can you even think about that?" I protested. But my objections didn't faze him. He continued to speculate about the potential inheritance, which disgusted me further. Unable to tolerate the situation at home, I decided to stay at my parents' house. It was closer to the hospital, and I needed to be there for my father. I informed my mother of my decision, explaining that I would be staying with them for the foreseeable future to be near my father. After some time, my father passed away peacefully, as if slipping into a gentle sleep. His departure was a profound loss, and in the quiet of those moments with my mother, I realized the depth of the challenges ahead. The grief was overwhelming. It felt as though we had exhausted all our tears, yet there were still funeral arrangements that needed our attention. Amid this sorrow, I contacted Charles to inform him of my father's passing and the upcoming funeral. Despite our strained relationship and my desire for a divorce, I felt it was necessary to inform him, given that we were still legally married. His response was as disheartening as ever. "So, your dad finally passed away, huh? Sorry for your loss, but I don't feel like attending the funeral. It's too much of a hassle," he said nonchalantly. His lack of empathy confirmed my worst suspicions about his character. I had secretly hoped he would show some respect by attending the funeral, but his indifference erased any lingering affection I might have had and turned it into disdain. I replied sharply, surprised by my frosty tone, "Do whatever you want." "Why are you so upset?" "Oh, and I'm curious about the inheritance," Charles taunted, his voice laced with mockery. Unable to endure his cruel laughter any longer, I ended the call abruptly. Ultimately, Charles did not attend my father's funeral. Some labeled him heartless, but I felt it was better he didn't appear, sparing us the pain of his presence on such a solemn occasion. It was a relief that he stayed away, allowing us to honor my father's memory undisturbed. After the funeral, my family, including my mother and me, gathered to discuss the inheritance. Thankfully, my father had made clear decisions about his estate beforehand, which allowed us to settle matters smoothly and find some closure. When I returned home, however, Charles blindsided me with an audacious plan. "Hey, it's been a while. I've decided to use the $6 million you inherited to renovate the family house," he declared. I was stunned, unable to comprehend how he knew about the money or why he assumed he could use it for renovations. "What do you mean? I have no idea about any large sum of money," I questioned, my confusion evident. With a smug chuckle, Charles revealed, "I had a chat with your mom. I might have nudged her a bit, hinting that if she didn't spill the beans about the inheritance, I might consider a divorce. She quickly spilled everything." The realization that he had coerced my mother into revealing details about the inheritance was infuriating. "You're despicable, threatening my mother just to find out. That's a low blow," I exclaimed, my voice rising with anger. "I don't care, the renovations are already underway with that $6 million, he said casually. "Yep, lucky me for snagging that cash. Good thing we're still hitched," Charles retorted smugly. While I was preoccupied with the funeral and its arrangements, he had already initiated the renovations using the inheritance. Speechless and betrayed, I was forced to confront the reality of Charles's manipulative and self-serving actions, reflecting on the drastic steps I needed to take next in our crumbling marriage. Charles's smirk was utterly repulsive as he presented me with an ultimatum in a tone that dripped with false generosity. "You have two choices. Move in with my parents or file for divorce," he said. I took a deep breath, looked him squarely in the eyes, and with a calm resolve replied, "I choose divorce, and I won't regret it." Charles laughed dismissively, thinking I'd eventually lament my decision. "From now on, we'll communicate through this lawyer," he said as he handed me a business card. He then added, with a subtle demand, "And don't forget to transfer the inheritance to my account." Silently, I began packing my belongings. As I walked out the door, Charles's voice followed me, a constant reminder, "Don't forget about the inheritance." Once I had recounted everything to my mother, she was shocked, not realizing the full extent of the strain between Charles and me. She apologized for sharing details about the inheritance under his pressure. "It's all right, Mom. I should have been more open, but him threatening you is unforgivable," I reassured her. I then asked if I could stay at our family home until I found a new place. She agreed without hesitation. The next day, my phone was inundated with calls from Charles, all of which I ignored. Eventually, he showed up at my parents' house, ringing the doorbell incessantly and causing a scene. My mother, worried about the disturbance, suggested I speak with him. "It might not resolve anything, but if he escalates further, we'll call the police," she said. Understanding her concern, I reluctantly agreed. With the security chain fastened, I opened the door just a crack. "This is getting out of hand, Patricia. When are you transferring that $6 million? I can't finish the renovations without it," Charles shouted, trying to shake the door. Remaining composed, I responded, "It's under consideration." Confused, Charles asked, "What do you mean, under consideration?" I took a deep breath and clarified, "What I inherited was my father's vacation house. It's a property, not cash, so I can't just transfer it to you." Charles's face registered shock. Sensing an opportunity, I pressed further. "And how did you manage to secure a $6 million renovation contract without any proof of funds?" "Well, I have a relative who owns a construction company," he admitted, somewhat deflated. "I mentioned I'd be receiving a $6 million soon, so they skipped the usual checks. If that's the case, remember," I began, leaving the sentence hanging as I closed the door firmly, cutting off any further discussion. Inside, I felt a mix of relief and resolve. It was clear that distancing myself from Charles was the right decision, and I was ready to begin the next chapter of my life, free from his manipulative grasp. I reminded Charles sternly as he fumbled in panic. "I warned you before we even talked about divorce," I told him. I made it clear that this could happen. "You've got to be kidding me," he exclaimed, frustration evident in his voice. "I already paid a deposit of $5,000 for the renovations, planning to cover the rest in installments. Now, what am I supposed to do?" He continued to argue, grasping at straws. "The wife's property is the husband's too, right? Even if it's not in cash, hand over that $6 million vacation home. We're still married, right?" "You've got it all wrong, Charles," I replied, my tone resolute. "Inherited property isn't shared, it's solely mine. Not a cent belongs to you. And just so we're clear, we're not a couple anymore. We're total strangers." Upon hearing this, Charles's desperation turned to anger. His face flushed a deep red as he raised his voice even louder. "Stop playing games. I'm calling off the divorce. Give me the inheritance right now," he demanded, trying to reach through the gap in the door. As the situation escalated, my mother, witnessing the altercation, quickly dialed the police. Charles withdrew his hand when he heard her on the phone, but then, with a sinister smirk, he declared, "I'm done with you," and fled the scene. After he left, the police arrived. The footage from the doorbell camera suggested that they might take action. The officers emphasized the importance of my safety and advised me to avoid any engagement with Charles in the future. They instructed me to keep the doors locked and, if necessary, pretend I wasn't home. 5 days later, I received a call from the police regarding the documentation concerning my father's real estate. I had put the real estate documents in my bag after moving back to my parents' house post-divorce, only to find them missing later. Learning that the documents had been recovered, I headed to the police station where, to my shock, Charles was present. It turned out Charles was the thief who had stolen the documents. I demanded an explanation. Wearing a sullen expression, he muttered, "You thought there might be cash in your bag since you inherited $6 million, right? So when I went through your stuff, I stumbled upon some important-looking documents related to the inheritance and decided to take them." Charles explained that he hadn't examined the documents closely at the time. It was only after learning from me that the $6 million wasn't in cash that the reality of his situation sunk in. His actions, driven by desperation and misguided assumptions, had led us to this pivotal and revealing moment. When Charles realized that what he had taken was the property title for a vacation house rather than cash, he decided to try converting the inheritance into money. He took the title to a real estate agent, hoping to initiate a sale, and was even accompanied by my in-laws. However, upon my arrival at the realtor's office, it became clear that the sale couldn't proceed. The title was still in my father's name, and the inheritance division had just been finalized. I was in the process of finding a notary to transfer the title to my name. Even if the inheritance had been settled, the property was still legally mine, which would make it nearly impossible for Charles to sell it without my consent. Frustrated, I confronted them, and they ludicrously suggested that I should buy the property myself since it belonged to my father-in-law. This absurd claim led the real estate agent's employees to call the police, likely due to Charles's aggressive behavior, which raised suspicions. As I stood in shock, Charles began to make desperate claims to the police officer. "I was just trying to sell it on her behalf. I didn't steal anything. I haven't done anything wrong. Please let me go," he pleaded, contradicting his earlier admission about taking the documents. Remaining composed, I clarified to the officer, "That's not true. I didn't ask him to sell anything. He stole it on his own. Plus, the documents he took were just copies, not the originals. Even if he tried, he couldn't have sold them." "You set me up. Don't play games with me," Charles shouted, his voice filled with fury. I responded coolly, "What are you even talking about? You stole on your initiative, and now all you do is spout nonsense. Just face the consequences of your criminal actions." Frustrated and cornered, Charles bit his lip in anger. As a result of his actions and the evidence against him, he was arrested for theft. With the news of Charles's arrest and his loss of the $5,000 deposit, my in-laws were disgraced as the parents of a criminal. They felt compelled to move from their town due to the embarrassment. Later, they harbored resentment towards the real estate agency that had reported Charles, resorting to making harassing calls and spreading false rumors. The real estate agency, understandably outraged, filed a lawsuit against them for obstructing business and attempted fraud, as they had tried to illegally sell a property they did not own. This series of events highlighted the lengths to which Charles and his parents were willing to go and the eventual consequences of their deceitful actions. Following the lawsuit, my in-laws found themselves financially drained, having had to pay a substantial amount in damages. In a state of desperation, they reached out to me for help. "Patricia, please, we used up our savings for the deposit and now we're in debt because of the settlement." My ex-mother-in-law's voice trembled with urgency over the phone. However, I felt no sympathy for them given the circumstances. "Why are you asking me for help? I'm divorced from Charles, and as far as I'm concerned, you are strangers to me now," I responded firmly. She pleaded, "You're wealthy, aren't you? Can you spare some money? We'll pay you back, I promise." "I don't believe that for a second. I'm ending this call. Don't contact me again," I replied coldly before hanging up and blocking their numbers. I had already blocked Charles's number long ago. Concerned for our safety, especially since Charles knew where my parents lived, I decided to sell our family home. My mother and I then moved to ensure our safety and peace of mind. As for the vacation house that sparked so much conflict, I put it back on the market. It sold quickly and without any complications, allowing my mother and me to start anew. Now, we live in a peaceful environment, away from the past turmoil, cherishing the memories of my father and enjoying our newfound tranquility. Hello, my name is Stephanie, a 35-year-old, and I've been married to Jerry for 3 years. We met through a relative who hoped a marriage would secure the future of my family's wealth. My sister Marilyn and I were the only heirs to our family's estate. Marilyn, vibrant and outgoing, contrasted sharply with my reserved nature. We lived with my father in the family home. After my mother's passing a few years ago, Jerry moved in. He initially seemed kind and attentive, especially to my father, which eased my integration into this new chapter of my life. However, a relative who had played matchmaker shared a concerning note just before our wedding. "Be careful with Jerry. He seems overly interested in financial matters." This warning lingered in my mind, though Jerry's behavior gave no immediate cause for alarm. As time passed, I noticed Jerry's casual inquiries into my father's finances during their relaxed conversations, but it didn't seem overly suspicious then. He also showed a peculiar interest in Marilyn, whose flamboyant style and dynamic personality were starkly different from mine. This difference did not escape Jerry, who once remarked, "Marilyn is quite different from you, Stephanie, isn't she?" His fascination with her made me uneasy, highlighting my insecurities about being plain and unremarkable. The turning point came when Jerry discovered I could not inherit my father's estate. His reaction was explosive and cruel. "You mean you can't inherit the property? I have no use for you anymore. We're getting divorced right now." His harsh words confirmed the warning I had been given. Shattered but not defeated, I found my resolve. Jerry remarried quickly, choosing none other than Marilyn as his new wife. However, I had the last laugh as events unfolded that neither Jerry nor Marilyn had anticipated. Their decision to overlook the deeper values of family and integrity for material gain was their undoing, and I ensured that my revenge was both sweet and just, finally closing this painful chapter of my life. If I had chosen not to marry, there would have been no one to inherit our family home. At first, I thought there was no reason to worry since I had a younger sister, Marilyn, who was not only beautiful but also seemed capable. However, I soon realized why our relatives were concerned about the future of our estate. Our father doted on Marilyn, supporting her through her education with little restraint. He sent her to college and even encouraged her to continue to community college after her graduation. Unlike others with clear academic or career goals, Marilyn seemed to attend these institutions more to avoid entering the workforce than to build a future. My mother, on the other hand, was practical and urged Marilyn to find a job right after her college graduation. Despite my mother's insistence, my father prevailed, allowing Marilyn to enroll in community college. Upon completion, Marilyn landed a job through one of my father's acquaintances, but her tenure was short-lived. She resigned after just 8 months. Her reason for leaving baffled me. "I can't showcase my talents at that company," she declared, as though she had mastered the intricacies of the job in such a brief period. Both my mother and I were stunned by her arrogance. Nevertheless, our father took her side once again and promptly found her another position. However, when my mother fell seriously ill and was hospitalized, Marilyn's pattern of avoiding long-term commitments continued. She visited our mother daily, which seemed caring at first, but it was clear she was mostly there to chat or scroll on her phone rather than provide any substantial assistance. I found myself managing the bulk of my mother's care needs, like changing her laundry, while Marilyn offered minimal help. Despite my mother enjoying Marilyn's company initially, her health declined sharply about a month into her hospital stay, eventually leading to a point where she could no longer speak. Tragically, within 3 weeks of her condition deteriorating, my mother passed away. The suddenness of her death left both my father and Marilyn too shaken to even prepare for her funeral, adding yet another layer of complexity to our family's trying times. After my mother passed away, I found myself handling all the funeral arrangements with some help from our relatives, and we managed to bid her farewell peacefully. Meanwhile, my sister, Marilyn, began a part-time job and decided to move out on her own. However, her earnings were not sufficient to cover her living expenses, so our father continued to support her financially, covering her rent and utilities. Previously, when my mother was alive, she was quite strict with Marilyn, and my father rarely gave her extra money. But after my mother's death, he began indulging her requests, giving her as much money as she asked for. I initially thought this arrangement was harmless, assuming both my father and sister were content. However, after I married and moved back into my parents' home with my husband, I discovered that my sister had also been asking my husband for money. He, enchanted by her charm, couldn't refuse her and even asked her to keep it a secret from me, fearing I might get jealous. It appeared Marilyn was comfortably living off the funds she received from both my father and my husband, attending her part-time job only when she felt like it. This unsustainable lifestyle came to a halt when my father fell ill and needed hospitalization. I was juggling my job and visits to the hospital to take care of him, but Marilyn was nowhere to be seen. Instead of helping, she started calling me, demanding money. "I've been getting money from Dad every month, so you need to keep giving it to me," she insisted over the phone, claiming her rent and utilities were still being paid from our father's account. Her tone was aggressive, and it was clear she felt entitled to this support regardless of our father's health or our family's circumstances. I was taken aback and furious when I first learned just how self-centered my sister had become, focusing solely on her own needs while our father lay ill in the hospital. I resisted the urge to end the call abruptly when she reached out, suspecting she was in some kind of trouble. Tentatively, I asked, "How much has Dad been giving you each month? You should consider getting a full-time job and managing with what you earn." Her response was gruff and unapologetic. "Stop nagging. I get $2,500 a month, plus the rent is separate, you know." Hearing her say this so nonchalantly shocked me. It made me realize that if I continued to supply her with this amount of money, she would never see the need to take her work life seriously. Initially, I didn't see a major issue with helping her financially, especially since I assumed that our father would soon recover. However, his condition deteriorated unexpectedly, prompting me to contact our relatives urgently. The doctors confirmed the severity of his situation, which left me deeply unsettled. During this stressful time, I yearned for my husband's support, but he seldom visited the hospital, citing his busy work schedule. When he did appear, His questions were insensitive and focused solely on the financial implications of our father's illness. Inheritance must be huge, right? Since you and your sister are the only heirs, are you going to split it in half? He asked casually. I was speechless and disheartened, unable to respond to my husband's crude interest in the inheritance. This moment was a stark realization for me, and I felt a profound sense of disgust. It dawned on me what our relatives had warned about. My husband's obsession with money was indeed real, and it tainted the way he viewed our family crisis. When I called my sister to inform her about our father's critical condition, her response was shockingly indifferent, focused solely on her finances. More importantly, make sure you pay me every month. I can't live without that money, she said before abruptly ending the call. I was furious at her selfishness, but another concern quickly overshadowed my anger. A faint male voice I recognized in the background of the call, which left me with an uneasy feeling. About a month later, my father passed away. Heartbreakingly, neither my sister nor my husband was present during his final moments. Having already managed my mother's funeral, I knew the immense burden of organizing another funeral. Yet again, I found myself alone in the preparations, as neither my sister attended nor did my husband offer any help. My husband briefly appeared at the funeral but quickly excused himself, claiming he had urgent work. A relative, the same one who had introduced me to my husband, noticed his early departure and asked, "Where's Jerry? It's strange for the host's husband to not be here, isn't it?" I managed only a wry smile in response, explaining, "He's busy with work, so he went home." The relative sighed at my answer, and I felt like sighing too, overwhelmed by the situation. Once the funeral was over and I had a moment to myself, my husband approached me with a sleazy grin and asked, "So, how much did you inherit? Even if you split it, you must have gotten a considerable amount, right?" His blunt curiosity about the inheritance was as crass as the warnings I had received from relatives before our marriage. His unabashed greed was apparent, just as they had cautioned. My sister ended up with $50 million according to his guess, while he assumed I received a similar share. In truth, I hadn't even spoken to the lawyer yet. My husband's fixation on the money, ignoring the emotional weight of my father's passing, highlighted a disheartening realization about his priorities. Still reeling from the funeral, I watched as my husband gleefully discussed the inheritance. Instead of anger, a bitter amusement washed over me. When I nonchalantly mentioned that I wouldn't inherit any property, his reaction was swift and harsh. "What? You can't inherit anything? I don't need you anymore. We're getting a divorce," he declared. I was already one step ahead, feeling equally resolved. "Let's do it. You married me for my father's money anyway," I retorted, slapping the already prepared divorce papers on the table. He was taken aback, perhaps not fully expecting my readiness, but he signed them nonetheless. As he left our home, he threw a spiteful remark over his shoulder. "I'll divorce you, who gets zero, and remarry your sister Marilyn, who gets the $50 million. His words didn't sting. I was too focused on freeing myself from our sham of a marriage. True to his nature, he wasted no time in pursuing Marilyn, starting the process of marrying her the very next day. A few days later, he called me, still fixated on the money. "Do you still believe that story? When will you handle the inheritance? Hurry up and give Marilyn the $50 million, he demanded over the phone. I had anticipated his call. Keeping my tone strictly professional, I invited him, "Let's discuss this at my place next Sunday. I'm preparing for the procedure and will be waiting." Thinking he was about to secure the inheritance, he agreed, ending the call in a jubilant mood. On the scheduled weekend, my ex-husband and Marilyn arrived at my family home, surprised to find I had called a lawyer to the meeting. My ex, trying to reassure himself, muttered, "Of course you need a lawyer when inheriting a large sum of money." I was inwardly eager to see his reaction when he discovered the reality of the situation, completely different from what he had imagined. As the lawyer faced my ex-husband with a look of confusion, he began the meeting not with the inheritance details but with a different agenda. Before we delve into inheritance matters, there's an issue of a compensation claim against you, Jerry, on behalf of Stephanie, the lawyer stated. He then laid out several photographs that showed my ex-husband leaving my sister's house, all marked with dates. These photos are evidence of infidelity before your divorce was finalized, which necessitates a compensation payment from you. This unexpected revelation caught my ex-husband off guard. The photos were the result of my swift action. Upon overhearing him discuss the inheritance with my sister over the phone, I immediately instructed the lawyer to gather proof of his infidelity. They might have assumed I was too preoccupied with my father's funeral to notice their meetings, but their regular rendezvous at her place had allowed me to collect ample evidence. The meeting's focus abruptly shifted from inheritance discussions to the compensation claim, leaving both my ex-husband and sister stunned. However, recovering quickly, my ex-husband scoffed. "Compensation is nothing compared to the $50 million I'm supposed to inherit. I'll pay it right away." His arrogance was palpable as he signed the compensation claim documents, confident in his forthcoming wealth. After he signed, I couldn't help but reveal the full extent of the situation. "Enjoy your life with my sister, who inherited nothing," I said. His smug demeanor faltered as I continued. "Since you've signed, I'll make sure you pay the compensation." At the mention of receiving zero from the inheritance, my sister let out a scream of disbelief. My ex-husband's face turned a bright red as he angrily blurted out, "There's no way the inheritance is zero. I won't let you take everything for yourself." The lawyer then began to clarify for the bewildered pair. "Marilyn was indeed your late mother's stepdaughter, but since she was never legally adopted by your father, there is no formal parent-child relationship. Therefore, Marilyn is not eligible to inherit any part of your father's estate." The reality of their situation was now painfully clear, as legal facts overshadowed their assumptions and desires. As I spoke to my bewildered sister, I recounted our family history to clarify her misconceptions. "When our parents remarried, you were only about a year old, so you probably don't remember, but I do. I was 8 years old and thrilled to suddenly have a sister," I explained. "Our parents had each brought a young child into the marriage, and a mediator had thought it best for them to join as a family. My mother embraced me as her own, and my father adored Marilyn, perhaps going so far as to spoil her because she wasn't his biological daughter. He might have felt the need to compensate for the lack of a legal bond. Though they remarried, my mother, suspected by relatives of targeting my wealthy family's assets, never legally adopted Marilyn. This suspicion led our relatives to only consider me as a legitimate heir to my father's property, wary of entanglements that could arise otherwise. There were no children from their union, which in retrospect might have complicated matters further. Now, it was clear why my father continued to financially support Marilyn into adulthood. Without a legal adoption, he couldn't leave her his inheritance. Likewise, I never legally adopted my mother, so we weren't officially parent and child either. However, this technicality never impacted our relationship. It seemed my parents had never explained to Marilyn that they were both remarried, and she only learned the truth today. My ex-husband, on the other hand, grasped the situation instantly, his face shifting from bright red to a pale shade of blue. He had not only failed to secure the inheritance he had hoped for from Marilyn, but had also inadvertently committed himself to paying compensation. With a stunned expression, my ex-husband asked me, "Was what you said about Marilyn getting $50 million and me getting nothing a lie?" I struggled to hold back my laughter before responding, "Of course it's a lie. It was to get back at you for cheating on me. Besides, there's no way our family's estate was ever worth $50 million. Even my wealthy father didn't have that much to leave behind." His realization that he had been deceived not just by the non-existent inheritance, but also by his own misconceptions and greed marked a turning point in our dealings. My satisfaction wasn't just in seeing his plans thwarted, but in clearing up the long-standing family misconceptions that had so deeply affected us all. Suddenly, my sister, who had been quiet throughout the discussion, erupted in panic. "I've been counting on Dad's inheritance and have done a lot of shopping. "What will happen to the money Dad used to pay me? Will Stephanie cover it?" she exclaimed. I responded calmly to my agitated sister. "You have a reliable husband now, don't you? Let Jerry support you." Turning to her husband, she saw only his pale face as he shook his head. "I've also been spending expecting the inheritance, so I can't afford it. Besides, I have to pay compensation now, so I'm financially stretched," he admitted. After his confession, my ex-husband suddenly shifted his tone and began to apologize profusely. "Stephanie, I'm sorry, it was all my fault. Can you forgive me and let's start over?" His sudden plea for forgiveness seemed almost comical given his earlier confidence. The lawyer, who had been silently observing the scene, couldn't help but laugh as he prepared to leave. The arrogance my ex-husband had shown upon arrival had completely vanished, replaced by desperate apologies. After the meeting, both my ex-husband and sister left the house dejectedly. It wasn't long before they divorced. My ex-husband, who had remarried Marilyn with the intention of inheriting a fortune, lost interest in her once the financial benefits were no longer a prospect. He muttered to himself about his inability to support her, especially with the compensation payments to me draining his finances. The compensation was set to be paid in installments directly from his monthly salary, since he had no assets. The lawyer reassured me that this arrangement would ensure I received every penny owed. As for my sister, without our father's financial support, she was forced to work part-time every day. Yet, she couldn't manage her debts and eventually filed for personal bankruptcy. She even lost her condominium and soon after disappeared, leaving no trace of her whereabouts. Our father's financial indulgence had unfortunately left her ill-prepared for the realities of financial responsibility. After all that had transpired, I chose to live alone in the family home. Some relatives suggested introducing me to potential suitors, but I declined. Burned by my past experience, I decided that if I were to consider marriage again, I would find someone on my terms, someone distinctly different from my ex-husband. This time, my choice would be mine alone, driven by genuine connection rather than financial expectations or familial pressures. When Terry accused me of infidelity during a business trip and then demanded a divorce, his voice thundering through the phone, I should have been shaken. Yet I remained unfazed. I knew this was just another one of his dramatic outbursts. Even as I felt his emotions tremble from afar, I was well prepared. His belief that I would be deceived by his theatrical act was almost laughable. As his baseless accusations continued to clash against my firm resolve, I found myself oscillating between irritation and mild amusement. But in this confrontation, I began to feel empowered. This wasn't just a minor disagreement, it was a defining moment for me. Internally, I smirked at his pathetic attempt to sway me. Then, in a pivotal flash of insight, I realized it was my turn to make a move. I'm Megan, 30 years old, and I've been consistently employed at a college bookstore since I graduated from junior college at 21. In contrast, Terry, who is 3 years my senior, has had a shaky career path. When we first met 2 years ago, he was frequently job hopping or unemployed. His marriage proposal came quickly, but I insisted on a precondition. He needed a stable job. I was determined not to start a marriage without securing our financial future. "Okay, but there's a condition," I stated firmly, noticing his worried expression. "You need to find a stable job. Otherwise, marriage is off the table. We need to consider our future." He tried to dismiss it with a nonchalant comment. "Don't worry, you're working, so there's no rush, right?" But my parents would have concerns if I got married without a stable job, Terry admitted after I laid down the condition. He promised to find a job before we would consider marriage seriously. With a newfound sense of responsibility, he began his job hunt and eventually landed an office role at a construction company. This allowed us to go ahead with our wedding plans. At the time, I viewed Terry as somewhat reckless with finances and his career approach, but I believed we could complement each other. I hoped to steer him toward financial prudence while he could bolster my strengths. Little did I know, however, that our real challenges were just on the horizon. About a year into our marriage, as we started looking into buying a house, Terry dropped a bombshell. "I might not qualify for a mortgage," he said offhandedly one day. I was stunned. "What do you mean?" I demanded more details. He explained, "Since I haven't been in my job for very long, I might need a guarantor for the mortgage. The only person who could help is my dad, but he's swamped with his gambling debts." "Why didn't you tell me this sooner?" I was flabbergasted, especially since we were already sitting with the contract and the real estate agent right there. Terry, ever unperturbed, simply suggested, "If we put the house in your name, it should be okay, right? You've been at your job for a long time, so securing the loan won't be a problem. We can both contribute to the mortgage payments. It's just a technicality." "That's not the point," I argued, feeling the frustration simmer. "Why didn't you bring this up earlier? This affects me too, and I'm not even prepared with the necessary paperwork." Although he apologized, his remorse seemed shallow, lacking genuine depth. Despite my desire to press the issue further, the contract was already on the table, pushing us into a corner. With the real estate agent present, I chose not to escalate the situation further. Reluctantly, I hurriedly gathered the necessary documents, like my income statement needed for the loan application, and, in a spur-of-the-moment decision, finalized the purchase of the house under my name. Doubts gnawed at me. Could I truly see a future with this man? Perhaps I should have firmly stated that we wouldn't proceed, instead of rushing to prepare the paperwork. My anxiety only deepened with the potential problem of my father-in-law's financial instability. Just the other day, I was talking to Dad. Terry started one evening, his voice casual. "He mentioned he might lose his house because of the debts I told you about, so he's thinking about moving in with us. Is that okay with you? Why would you even consider that without discussing it first?" I responded instantly, frustration rising. Terry just shrugged. "Well, he's in trouble, and my brother is working abroad and can't help. I'm the only one Dad can turn to. Maybe we could let him stay with us temporarily, at least until he sorts out his situation. But having him live with us permanently? That's a huge decision." Terry frowned. "You just don't want him to stay, do you? If he moves in, we could split the living expenses. You're always talking about money." "The money that you never seem to contribute?" I retorted sharply. "You promised we'd split the mortgage, but I'm the only one paying. You haven't contributed at all. In a marriage, finances are supposed to be shared. It's not just my money, it's supposed to be ours. It's only coming out of my account because the house is in my name. You're being incredibly self-centered." My voice was thick with exasperation, but Terry muttered under his breath, "I hate discussing money," before storming out of the room. Such disputes became a regular occurrence in our home. Every time, Terry would dismiss my concerns, leaving unresolved tensions to simmer. Despite the unresolved tensions between us, Terry didn't ignore his family's situation entirely. As part of his job in construction site administration, which often entailed dealing with real estate contracts, he actively sought advice from a particular agency on how to secure the best deal for selling his family's home, including all the necessary procedures. I often caught snippets of these discussions, and although they were a constant reminder of our issues, it was somewhat comforting to know he was taking action. However, the thought of my in-laws possibly moving in with us after the sale of their home loomed over me like a dark cloud. Terry began attending meetings with real estate agents and even included his parents, but without my involvement. His weekends started to fill up with trips away from home, and eventually he left for a prolonged business trip to oversee a construction site far away. At the time, I didn't fully grasp it, but the seeds of our ongoing power struggle had been planted. A few days after Terry left, I decided to indulge myself with a little shopping and a cup of tea. At the cafe, a familiar face greeted me, someone who brought back memories of past interactions at our home. It was Bruce, a young employee from the real estate company Terry frequently consulted. Terry had mentioned before that Bruce was relatively new to the company, having been there less than a year. "Ah, yes, I remember you. You visited our house before, right?" I recalled. "Yes, I apologize for dropping by unannounced that time and even joining for a meal," Bruce replied, seeming genuinely apologetic. "There's no need to worry, I should have been more welcoming," I responded, reflecting on the past interaction. We ended up sharing tea together. Bruce was affable and, despite his youth, seemed more level-headed than Terry. As we chatted, we discovered some common ground and our conversation flowed easily. Eventually, we bid each other farewell, each going our separate ways but feeling a bit more connected than before. I never imagined that a simple meeting for tea could later be misconstrued into a devastating accusation of infidelity. Yet, that's exactly what happened when Terry confronted me upon his return. "You've been cheating on me while I was away, haven't you? We're getting a divorce. Give the house to my parents and leave immediately," Terry declared abruptly. His words struck me like a force, blindsiding me at a moment when I was least prepared. I stood there reeling as I considered whether the rumors I had heard were true, rumors that Terry had been spreading lies, crafting a narrative of my supposed infidelity to rationalize his desire for a divorce. The supposed other man in this fabricated story was Bruce, the very person Terry had accused me of having an affair with. Bruce showed up at my doorstep the day after our innocuous tea meeting. "I apologize for the unexpected visit yesterday. Terry asked me to reach out to you," Bruce admitted as he stood in my doorway. Confused but curious, I invited him in, eager to understand the full story. What Bruce revealed next left me utterly stunned. Terry had concocted a plan to frame me for infidelity as part of his strategy to secure a divorce. Bruce was unwillingly pulled into this scheme, tasked with fabricating evidence to support Terry's plot. Terry's deceit was driven by two primary motives. First, he was anxious about losing his parents' home due to their financial troubles, and viewed living with his parents as an easy out. My resistance to this idea had pushed him to concoct a scheme to oust me and claim the house for himself. Secondly, Terry had been carrying on an affair of his own. He spent many weekends with his mistress under the guise of discussing issues with my parents-in-law. His growing infatuation with her had led him to see me, his wife, as an obstacle. By framing me for infidelity, he aimed to remove me from the picture and secure the house for his ends.
Despite my initial belief that Terry lacked shrewdness, the complexity and maliciousness of his scheme were shockingly devious. As I expressed my disgust, Bruce apologized for his part in the plot. However, I had no intention of letting Terry succeed with his deceitful plans. I pretended to cooperate while secretly strategizing a countermove. With Bruce's insights into real estate, he suggested several tactics. Ultimately, he proposed a bold plan: sell the house while Terry was away. When Terry returned and was stunned by the news of the sale, I was ready with my confrontation. "I know everything, Terry. Bruce recorded all your schemes, including your attempts to frame me for cheating with him. If we go through with this divorce, I can seek alimony and take you to court," I declared, savoring the shock on his face. "Why?" he stammered, bewildered. But I wasn't done yet. I had one more revelation. "You might not have realized, but Bruce isn't just any new employee. He's the son of the company's CEO," I pointed out, astonished at Terry's ignorance. "Didn't you notice Bruce shares the same last name as the CEO? How did that escape your notice?" My frustration was palpable. Terry tried to brush it off. "Well, Bruce's last name isn't exactly uncommon. Are you serious right now?" I couldn't believe his lack of awareness. "Yes, I'm serious," Terry replied, his astonishment clear. It slowly dawned on him that Bruce's involvement meant his company, a crucial client that handled much of his family's real estate dealings, was now intimately aware of his deceit. If this news reached the CEO, Terry would be in serious trouble. Indeed, Bruce had likely already informed his father of the entire situation. "Look, fine," Terry began, as he realized the precariousness of his position. "I'll check it out, but if you're lying, I'll figure it out," Terry said, his voice strained before abruptly hanging up. He soon realized the full impact of his schemes when the real estate company, owned by Bruce's father, decided to cut all business ties with him, refusing any further dealings or advice on his family property. With the sale of my house already finalized, Terry had no choice but to return to his family home after his business trip. Fortunately, Bruce had helped me find an affordable apartment, easing my transition as I began the divorce proceedings. Despite this, Terry continued to reach out, his voice desperate over the phone. "I'm sorry, Megan, please forgive me," he pleaded. "It's too late for apologies," I replied firmly. "You tried to manipulate me by using someone else. Why should I believe anything you say now?" "Don't say that. After our divorce, you can be with that other woman, right? That's what you wanted, isn't it?" he retorted, trying to shift the blame. "Yeah, she had someone else she liked and dumped me. What a sorry tale. But just because of that, don't expect me to change my mind and come running back to you," I muttered, ending the call with a heavy sigh. Despite my efforts to keep my new address from him, Terry's calls were incessant. Each time he pleaded, "Please don't leave me. I'll change. I'll be a better husband." But I was tired of his empty promises. Once the divorce was finalized, I planned to delete his number, block him on WhatsApp, and cut off all contact completely. To complicate matters, even my mother-in-law reached out, her voice pleading, "Please, Megan, we'd be lost without you. It's not just about the house, right?" "But there's no house left," I reminded her sharply. "We're not that heartless. Come back and you'll understand," she implored. "You wanted the money, didn't you?" I shot back, my frustration evident. "That's not true. You're being unfair. You tried to coerce me into living with you," she tried to reason, but I was beyond listening. Their motives had been clear, and I was determined not to fall back into their manipulative grasp. When I declined to comply, Terry turned to deception to gain an advantage during our divorce proceedings. I simply cannot place my trust in someone who employs such underhanded methods. I made my stance clear, pointing out his obvious financial motivations. Despite my firm rejections, the requests kept coming. Then my father-in-law intervened, his voice full of condescension, questioning whether I was neglecting my responsibilities as a daughter-in-law by not helping his wife more. He couldn't believe I would refuse, attributing my stance to personal debts I had supposedly accrued. I stood my ground, and in response, he raised his voice so much it was painful to listen. He accused me of being cruel, neglecting my mother-in-law during her time of need, and unfairly blaming her for my issues. He threatened to make me regret my decisions, calling me a wicked woman. After ending that distressing call, still resolute, I saved the audio recording and discussed it with my lawyer. It turned out that my father-in-law's aggressive words were legally considered threats. With this recorded proof, I warned Terry that I was prepared to take legal action unless he agreed to the divorce terms. Faced with no other options, he finally agreed, albeit reluctantly. This marked my liberation from the oppressive grasp of his family. Following the divorce, Terry's professional reputation took a hit. His colleagues' trust waned, and he faced diminished responsibilities at work. Financial strains forced him to sell his family home at a significantly lower price. Now, he lives in a small apartment with his parents, dealing with a reduced income and the pressure of supporting his family. Additionally, he is required to pay me alimony. I learned about the extent of Terry's difficulties through Bruce, who stayed in touch as a trusted confidant. When I was exploring new career opportunities, I found a chance to use the customer service skills I'd developed at a clothing store. Bruce, who had recently moved to the HR department of a real estate firm, suggested I apply for a role that demanded strong communication skills. After giving it some thought and discussing the potential with Bruce, I decided to accept the job offer and joined the real estate company. During this time of transition, Bruce and I continued to grow closer, and our friendship eventually turned into something more. After a year of dating, we decided to get married, and I became the partner of someone who would one day become the president of the company. It was an unexpected twist of fate that Terry, who had once wrongly accused us of infidelity, would see us fall in love and marry. Now, with the support of my new family, including my in-laws, I am excited to build a beautiful future with Bruce. We look forward to creating many happy memories together, backed by the love and support of those around us.
I vividly recall the day Matthew walked into my life, as clearly as if it were just yesterday. I was nestled in a small cafe, nursing the least expensive coffee they offered while trying to organize my scattered thoughts. That's when he entered, effortlessly resembling a character from a cinematic scene. There were no dramatic lights or soundtrack, just the jingle of the door and the blend of stale coffee and his aftershave filling the air. "Mind if I sit here?" he asked, his smile brimming with charm as he gestured to the vacant chair opposite me. "Go ahead," I managed to respond, striving to maintain my composure despite the surprise of his unexpected arrival. We connected instantly, as seamlessly as two puzzle pieces fitting together. We shared countless interests, from marathon sessions of cheesy TV series to debates over the best pizza topping, undoubtedly pineapple. Our casual meetings quickly deepened into something more serious. It felt as though we had known each other for ages, and soon enough, marriage was a topic of serious discussion. However, the challenging part was yet to come. Meeting his parents was akin to entering a lion's den with a stake tied to my back. They had a peculiar way of smiling that seemed more like a silent judgment, assessing if I measured up to their standards. "You're the one Matthew can't stop talking about, huh?" his mother remarked, her tone more icy than welcoming. "Yep, that's me," I replied, doing my best not to be affected by her daunting presence. It didn't take long for them to express their wish for us to sign a prenup. I wasn't interested in their wealth, but their approach left a bitter taste in my mouth. "I'll sign your prenup," I told them, "but here's the condition. If one of us cheats, the cheater owes $320,000. Matthew's expression was one of utter shock, as if I had hit him with a cold, wet fish. "Babe, I'd never cheat on you," he assured me, looking utterly sincere. "Yeah, well, my ex said the same before I caught him red-handed," I retorted. It was all or nothing. Matthew eventually conceded, though his parents were less than pleased. We thought that settled it, but surprises were still in store. One evening, curled up on our creaky old couch, a piece we often talked about replacing but held too many dear memories, we were lost in planning our dream trip to Italy, the mundane hum of the TV a mere backdrop to our excited chatter. The idea of our trip to Catania was as thrilling as it was financially daunting. "Imagine it, Matthew. The food, the wine, the art. We have to go," I declared, my eyes sparkling with eagerness. Matthew pulled me closer with a chuckle. "Janice, you had me at food, but let's be real. Our bank account is more cut out for backyard camping than jet-setting to Catania." I playfully nudged him. "Then we'll save up. We can cut back on things we don't need, like your video games." Feigning horror, he replied, "Not the video games. Take my shirts, my shoes, even my precious coffee maker, but please spare the games." We both laughed. That was typical of us, dreaming big while embracing the simplicity of our lives, finding contentment not just in grand adventures, but also in the everyday joys.
On Saturday mornings, Matthew tried his hand at cooking breakfast. He wasn't exactly a chef, but he had mastered the art of making scrambled eggs and toast, which he served with pride alongside his less-than-stellar coffee. "I'm feeling scrambled eggs today, what do you think?" he'd ask, heading to the kitchen. "Only if you promise not to burn the toast this time," I'd tease, taking over the coffee duties. One day, while we were doing the dishes, a mundane task made special by doing it together, Matthew broached a topic we had been skirting around. "Janice, we need to talk about, starting a family," he said, breaking the comfortable silence. I paused, a plate in hand. "I know. It's just scary, isn't it? What if it doesn't work out for us?" Matthew dried his hands on a towel and turned to face me. "Then we'll face it together. But we won't know until we try, right? How hard can it be?" He chuckled, a nervous affection in his voice. Famous last words, huh? That was us, facing whatever life threw at us together.
Even when his mom started dropping not-so-subtle hints about grandchildren. "Janice, dear, when are you going to give me some grandbabies? You're not getting any younger, she'd say, her voice sweet but her intentions clear. I'd bite my tongue, flash a smile, and chirp, "We're on it, right, Matthew?" And he'd chime in, "Mom, chill out, okay? These things don't happen overnight." But as time passed, the pressure mounted, not just from his mom, but from within us as well. We both longed for a family, but things weren't falling into place as we had hoped. Our home often felt tense, with Kayla, Matthew's sister, adding to the strain. She had taken up the new hobby of making my life difficult, her sharp words cutting through the peace of our home. It all came to a head one Sunday during what was meant to be a serene and easygoing lunch. Right on cue, Kayla barged in uninvited just as we were about to start eating. The atmosphere tensed immediately as she stepped in, her eyes sweeping the room like she was surveying a battlefield. "Well, isn't this a quaint little setup?" she sneered, eyeing the modest meal I had prepared. Trying to keep the peace, I mustered a smile and focused on maintaining a calm facade amidst the brewing storm. "It's just a simple meal, Kayla. Nothing fancy. Please have a seat," I said as we gathered around the dinner table. Kayla wasted no time diving into her usual tirade. "Janice," she started, her voice thick with condescension, "I was talking to Mrs. Kathleen the other day. Her grandson just became a dad. It made me think, when will you and Matthew have some good news for us? Time's ticking, My cheeks burned with a mix of embarrassment and irritation. I looked to Matthew for support, but he seemed suddenly fascinated by his meal. "Mom, seriously," Matthew mumbled, though his words lacked conviction, and we all felt it. Unfazed, Kayla continued, "I hate to be blunt, but you're not getting any younger. You work hard for your money, Matthew. Why waste it on Janice if she can't fulfill her basic duties as a wife? Hiring help for cleaning and cooking would be much more efficient, don't you think?" That comment was the final straw. "I'm doing my best here, Kayla," I blurted out. "It's not like I don't want children. And as for the house and cooking, I didn't realize marriage came with a job description." Kayla scoffed. "Marriage isn't a free ride, Janice. You have responsibilities, and frankly, you're not meeting them." The air thickened with tension, and tears welled up in my eyes. But the deepest cut wasn't Kayla's biting words. It was Matthew's silence. When he finally spoke, it wasn't to defend me. "Mom's right. Maybe we should consider getting some help around here. It would take some pressure off you, too," he suggested. His words felt like a betrayal. I was starkly alone in this. As Kayla's visits became more frequent, so did her criticisms. She'd inspect every corner of our home, pointing out any flaw. "You call this clean?" she'd sneer. "Looks like a pigsty to me." Then came the jabs about my appearance. "Is that what you're wearing? A wife should dress to please her husband. No wonder Matthew seems exhausted. He comes home to this?" I tried to stand my ground. "Kayla, I dress for myself, not for Matthew.
And he's tired because he works hard, not because of my outfit. But it was futile. Kayla had made up her mind about me, and nothing I said swayed her. Matthew's lack of support wounded me deeply. Every night after his mother left, we'd argue. Why won't you defend me, Matthew? She's bulldozing over us and you just stand by. Janice, she's set in her ways. What do you expect me to do? Kick my mom out? No, but I expect you to be my partner, to stand with me, not against me. It became clear that this situation was more than just Kayla's disapproval. It was a test of our marriage, of whether we could endure the relentless onslaught of Kayla's criticisms. As the weeks passed, it dawned on me that this wasn't a temporary phase. It was a full-blown assault. If we didn't take action soon, there might not be anything left to salvage. The atmosphere between Matthew and me had turned icy, exacerbated by Kayla's intensified critiques. Life at home had become unusually tense, and I couldn't shake the feeling that Matthew was keeping something from me. It wasn't just the usual stress of his job. There was an unsettling change in his behavior that hinted at deeper secrets. It began subtly with his phone habits. Matthew, who had always been an open book, started to step out of the room for calls, particularly those from someone named Austin, allegedly a new colleague who had a lot of questions.
One quiet evening, trying to keep the conversation light, I asked, "Who's this Austin at work?" Matthew's reaction was instant and telling. His body stiffened and he looked away, a clear signal of his discomfort. "Just a new guy at the office, really inquisitive." He answered too quickly, avoiding my gaze. But there were more troubling signs. Matthew, previously indifferent to fashion trends, began transforming his wardrobe. Out went the graphic tees and faded jeans, replaced by neatly pressed shirts, sleek trousers, and even cologne, a new scent that clung to him each morning. "What's with the new look? Planning to model for a department store catalog?" I joked one morning as he fixed his hair in a new style. He just gave a nonchalant smirk. Why not spruce things up a bit? No harm, right? But the late nights started to pile up too. "Sorry, love, this project is killing me. I'll be home late," his texts read night after night, and it would often be the early hours of the morning before I heard the turn of his key in the door. Something felt wrong, a gnawing sense that wouldn't go away. Driven by a mixture of fear and need for the truth, I hired a private investigator, a decision that felt ripped from a melodramatic detective series. The results were as dramatic as the decision itself. A plain envelope filled with photographs and a voice recording. The images showed Matthew with another woman, their closeness undeniable, while their intimate conversations on the recording shattered any illusions. Here was a man in love, but not with me. As I absorbed the shock, sitting alone with the cold truth laid bare on my kitchen table, I realized these pieces of evidence could be critical if our marriage dissolved into a divorce. The photographs stole scenes from our shared life, turning them into fragments of betrayal. The voice recording mocked every tender word he had ever spoken to me. Yet, I kept this devastating discovery to myself, bearing the weight of heartbreak alone. I wasn't ready to confront him, not just yet. I needed time to plan, to figure out how to approach the likely end of our marriage with some semblance of grace. In the following days, Matthew and I continued our charade. He wore the mask of the affectionate husband, and I played the role of the content wife, our exchanges peppered with artificial laughter and hollow words. "Everything all right?" he would ask, concern painting his voice. "Just tired, you know. Work's been crazy," I'd reply, the lie tasting sour in my mouth. Then one day, as I passed by Matthew's slightly open office door, the truth finally spilled out. Matthew and Kayla were discussing not trivialities, but the future of our relationship with grave seriousness. "I can't do this anymore, Mom. It's not about Janice not having kids, it's more than that. I feel like we're just coexisting, not really together," Matthew confessed, his tone weary.
Kayla's response was sharp as a knife. "But Matthew, think about it. She hasn't given you a child. What else does she bring to our family? But let's not rush. My 60th birthday is just around the corner." Their words, heavy and cold, confirmed the lonely path ahead. This wasn't just a rough patch. It was a profound disconnect that might not be mended. As I stood there, the fabric of our marriage unraveling, I knew decisions lay ahead that would redefine my future. We couldn't miss out on a generous gift from her, could we? Kayla's words, dripping with cynicism, pierced me deeply. They had a plan: keep me around just long enough to enjoy the lavish gifts from her upcoming birthday celebration before unceremoniously cutting ties. "Just a bit longer," Kayla had said with a venomous smirk. I stood frozen, fury and disbelief coursing through me. It was clear they intended to discard me as easily as one would cross off an item on a grocery list. The sting of betrayal ignited a fiery determination within me. They saw me as a mere pawn in their twisted game, but I was resolved to show them I was no one's fool. A few days later, we sat down to a family dinner that felt more like a staged play than a warm gathering. Kayla, with a calculated smile, turned to me. "So, Janice dear, what do you have planned for my birthday? Something special, I hope?" I met her gaze with a calm that belied my inner turmoil. "Actually, Kayla, I've been thinking about arranging a dinner at the city's most exclusive restaurant, an evening you won't forget." Her eyes sparkled with greedy anticipation as she exchanged a satisfied look with Matthew. They thought they had cornered me, but little did they know I was already steps ahead in a different game. "Oh, Janice, that sounds wonderful. Just close family, keep it intimate," Kayla purred with feigned sweetness.
"Absolutely, Kayla. We'll make it a night to remember," I responded, the words tasting of ashes in my mouth. The weeks leading up to Kayla's 60th birthday felt like marching toward a day of reckoning. Each of Kayla's smirks and Matthew's dismissive nods only fueled my resolve. My plan was simple yet bold: host the lavish dinner as a supposed gesture of goodwill, then spring a monumental surprise. As the plans unfolded, the devil lay in the details. The night before the party, our home was charged with silent tension. Matthew, unaware of the brewing storm, lounged on the couch, absorbed in his phone. "Everything ready for tomorrow?" he asked without looking up. "You could say that," I replied, my voice steady despite the storm within. The day arrived, and as guests filled the opulent dining room we had reserved, the air was thick with anticipation. My heart raced, not with nerves, but with the thrill of imminent revelation. Kayla, basking in the spotlight, reveled in the grandeur. "Oh, Janice, you've truly outdone yourself. This place is divine," she announced, her voice carrying across the room. As the evening progressed, laughter and stories filled the air, masking the undercurrents of the gathering. Just as dessert plates were cleared, the moment I had been waiting for arrived. The waiter approached discreetly and whispered the staggering cost of the dinner: $10,000. I handed over my credit card, unnoticed by most. Then, as if on cue, Matthew dropped his bombshell. "Janice, it's time for the truth. I'm done with this, with us. I want a divorce," he declared, his words cutting through the festive noise and suffocating the atmosphere. Before I could process his words fully, Kayla, sharp and decisive, interjected. "Well, now that it's out in the open, it's best you leave, Janice. Tonight is about family and, well, you're no longer part of ours." The room fell into stunned silence, every gaze fixed on me, yet I refused to crumble. With a composure I scarcely felt, I rose from my seat, nodded, and walked out without a word. The chill of the night air hit me as I left, the weight of finality crashing over me as I made my way to a friend's apartment. The night closed in, a stark reminder of the cold journey ahead, but I walked on, resolved to start anew from the wreckage of what once was. With steely determination setting in, I finalized my plans and packed my essentials,
transforming the numbness of betrayal into decisive action. This was the close of one chapter and the beginning of another. As I zipped up my last suitcase, my phone began to buzz insistently. I tried to ignore it, but curiosity eventually won over. Kayla's frantic voice blared from the other end. "Janice, the payment didn't go through. You need to fix this right away," she demanded. The irony of the moment was bittersweet. In my preparations, I had foreseen such a move and had already blocked access to our shared accounts, anticipating it might be Matthew's first line of defense. "Oh, Kayla, what a shame. But since I'm no longer part of the family, as you've made abundantly clear, I'm afraid you'll have to sort this out yourself." Her fury crackled through the phone, a melodious sound to my ears after the betrayal I'd endured. The chaos that followed was the perfect ending to the farce my marriage had become. I heard stories of the restaurant staff demanding payment, Kayla's escalating tantrums, and eventually the police arriving to calm the storm she had whipped up. In the end, it was Matthew and his family who were left to scramble to cover the bill, a fitting end to their deceit. The morning after the dinner was like waking up after a storm. I returned to what was once our shared home for one final time, divorce papers in hand, ready to confront whatever remained of our relationship. The atmosphere was electric, almost tangible as if it could be sliced with a knife. Matthew and Kayla were in the midst of a heated discussion, their animosity palpable. "You've got some nerve showing up here after last night," Matthew spat, his expression twisted with anger and disbelief. "Great! You've humiliated us in front of the entire city. Do you understand the humiliation of having the police called because of your antics? People were laughing, filming," Kayla added, her words sharp as knives. I faced their fury with a calm I scarcely felt inside. "Shame? Is that your primary concern right now?" I retorted, throwing the divorce papers on the table and placing the damning photos of Matthew's infidelity on top of them.
Matthew's face went pale as he picked up the photos, his mother looming over his shoulder. Their anger quickly dissolved into shock, then morphed into panic as the gravity of the situation sank in. "And let's not overlook the prenup, shall we?" I continued, my voice steady and unwavering. "You stray, you pay. Precisely $320,000. Kayla's face twisted into a snarl. "You wouldn't dare. You can't do this to us." "Oh, but I can and I will," I retorted, my voice devoid of warmth, resolute in my decision. Recognizing the seriousness of the situation, Matthew changed his approach. "Please, let's discuss this. We can find a solution." A bitter, mirthless laugh escaped me. "Find a solution? Do you think a few words can undo everything?" "No, Matthew, it's over." Kayla, ever the manipulator, tried to soften her tone, dripping with false concern. "Janice, darling, think about what you're doing. This will destroy us. That ship has sailed, Kayla. You should have thought about that before." Their pleas turned to desperate entreaties, their words a frantic attempt to salvage whatever dignity remained. But the time for words had passed and the moment for action had arrived. My resolve was unyielding. I was done being the victim, finished with their deception and manipulation. In the end, Matthew had no choice but to borrow money from his parents to settle the financial arrangements with me. As I walked away from that house for the last time, check in hand, I felt an immense weight lift from my shoulders. After everything that had transpired, I was finally free. I used the money from Matthew to make a down payment on a modest yet cozy place of my own. It's incredible how much peace you can find in a home that's entirely yours, where every nook feels like a sanctuary from the storms of a past life. Now, life is quieter, and that's exactly how I prefer it. I have a job that keeps me busy, friendly neighbors who greet me with smiles, and a small garden that's mine alone to cultivate. Occasionally, I hear bits of gossip about Matthew and Kayla. Just the other day, while picking up coffee from the local cafe, a popular spot in the community, I ran into someone I knew from the old neighborhood. After exchanging pleasantries, they leaned in,
their voice dropping to a hush, and said, "Hey, have you heard the latest about your ex and his mom?" Their eyes sparkled with intrigue. I raised an eyebrow, intrigued yet detached. "Can't say that I have, do tell." They seemed to savor sharing the gossip. Apparently, Kayla isn't too pleased with Matthew's new girlfriend. Rumor has it they've been arguing nonstop. It puts your past situation in a new light, doesn't it? We quickly moved on from the topic, but as I walked away with my coffee, I felt a deep sense of relief. There was a time when such news would have disturbed me, but now it was just another story in someone else's drama. These days, my biggest concerns are whether my tomatoes will ripen before the squirrels get to them, or if I'll ever master yoga without looking like a newborn deer. Life is simpler, quieter, and significantly more satisfying on this side of the chaos.